Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first Charlotte edition of the Rowdy.com Big Three. Sitting alongside, or standing actually.
He's standing.
As it turns out, Buzz Cutler, I'm Bass Masters. We're talking racing from the world headquarters of racing.
Don't be fooled that we're in front of the football stadium.
Charlotte, North Carolina. We have just moved the Rowdy World headquarters here, and we are talking Pocono. Pretty uneventful first 150 laps. Very eventful last 50 laps.
Made up for it in the last half of the race, indeed.
Tricky triangle.
What do you want to talk about first? How about Greg Biffle bringing home the checkered for the first time in umpteen races while Jack Roush is laying in his hospital bed at the Mayo Clinic?
Some things just seem like they're meant to be, right? I mean, Greg Biffle didn't have the best car for a lot of that race, and I think the thing that you overlook when you talk about the two-tire call, which did get him track position, did get him out front, was that for that call to work, Cutler, the car had to be handling a lot better than it was during most of that race, and it was handling pretty well at the end.
Well, and what I think struck me is the contrast between what the 16 team was able to do compared to the 48. It used to be that the 48 was the team you could count on chasing a track, chasing an ill-handling car, and getting it dialed in by the end of the race. The 48 did not do that on Sunday, whereas the 16 did. So good for Ford. Good for Greg Biffle. Both he and Carl Edwards seem to be on the upswing here.
Yeah, Carl finished third, again, a pit call. But listen to Greg describe his car at the beginning of the race and how much better it was at the end.
I had a lot of trouble, through the first part of the race with the front of the race car just not wanting to turn the front tires. So Greg did some shim adjustments on the front. And, we did some tire pressure and some wedge and track bar and got the thing handling fairly well. Late in the race, I don't know if it was the cool weather, the mist or what, but when it started cooling off, that thing just, to me, was like a completely different race car. I don't know what happened to it, but it simply took off.
All right, let's move on to issue number 2. We have to talk about these late race pit calls. Some people took 2 tires. Obviously, Greg Biffle did that in 1. Some people took 4 tires. Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, Juan Pablo Montoya. Some people took no tires.
Right.
David Reagan. Sam Hornish stayed out altogether.
Well, I got to tell you, Cutler, it's hard for me to fault the guys that took 4 just based on what happened earlier, because you saw Greg Biffle make a 2-tire call a couple times in the race, and while those calls worked because it did gain him track position, it didn't give him the lead. He wasn't able to hold the lead. The 4 tires seemed to work better. So it's hard to fault Gordon or Brian Patty, Juan Pablo Montoya's crew chief, for going with 4, again, based on what you saw earlier in the race. On the other hand, you look at Indianapolis from the week before, and that was clearly in the minds of Biffle and Greg Irwin to make the 2-tire call. So I can't fault the guys who made 4, especially with that many laps at a very long Pocono raceway, but it was not the right call.
And you
once again.
cannot compare Pocono to Indianapolis. I know everybody says, well, they're both flat, they have distinct corners, they're similar, but come on, Indianapolis is an aero push track. Pocono is not. Pocono is a much rougher.
Well, apparently it is, because these guys couldn't catch him. And once again, didn't you find it interesting that Tony Stewart took 4 tires and was able to get almost all the way back to the lead, just like Biffle at Indy took 4 and was able to get almost all the way back to the lead, whereas the guy that looked like the fastest car out front, last week it was Juan Pablo, this time was Jeff Gordon, really couldn't go anywhere with a 4
And I
tires.
think if you're going to fault Steve Letarte or Brian Patty for anything, it's for not setting up a car that could work in traffic. Darian Grubb obviously did, and that was the difference maker between the 14 and the 24 and the 42.
All right, now talk about difference maker. We had one of the scariest wrecks you are ever going to see at Pocono, and that really set the stage for the end of that race, and that was Jimmie Johnson getting into Kurt Busch with Elliott Sadler paying a hefty price behind. But this is not the first time that Jimmie and Kurt have gotten into it.
No, I want to play you this snippet from New Hampshire. But I think even though it's from New Hampshire, it's going to be really interesting. Take a listen.
I was a little shocked, and I haven't spoken to him or really seen any video to know if he slipped and accidentally got into me or if that was his intentions. If it was his intentions, that's the first time that I've, in 9 years racing with him, experienced that, and definitely changed the way that I raced with him from that point moving on. I hate that he felt that I wasn't going to wreck him, because that was my goal, was to wreck him.
Well, I don't think personally that Jimmie was trying to wreck Kurt there.
I don't either.
But he did wreck him, and I have a feeling these two guys are not done with each other. just yet because they had exchanged words at Bristol. Then I think they had an incident at Sonoma where Kurt was not pleased with Jimmie, said he's not driving like a champion. Then they had their bump and run back and forth at New Hampshire, and now this.
Well, I think the key thing that I took away from that quote we just played, that little video snippet, is Jimmie Johnson saying, I will now be racing Kurt Busch differently. If they didn't have that bump and run exchange in New Hampshire, would we have seen the attempt at bump drafting yesterday?
But bump drafting theoretically is to help Kurt Busch. Right?
Yeah, well,
theoretically,
true.
that's not taking any kind of payback or racing him differently. I just think Jimmie doesn't know how to bump draft that well.
Perhaps that's true.
I mean, I don't think he was trying to do it. Now, let's just briefly.
But look at Kurt Busch. Look for Kurt Busch to pay Jimmie back. I don't think he cannot at this point.
Yeah, I don't know. He was not very happy afterwards. And I want to say this, and maybe we'll talk about this a little more tomorrow, but the hit that Elliott Sadler took was one of the scariest things you'll ever see.
Yeah.
The Hans device, in my opinion, it saved him so much pain and anguish, not to say his life, Cutler. I mean, that was the scariest wreck you'll ever see, head on into the wall. And drivers have talked about that area of the racetrack now for at least 2 or 3 years. I'm glad that Pocono is going to address it, and I'm sure they are going to address it.
Well, what I don't understand is after Jeff Gordon hit the inside retaining wall at Las Vegas, what was it, last season or the season before, where there were no safer walls, why wasn't that the wake-up call for these tracks? Why do we then need another wake-up call? It's high time that NASCAR mandated inside safer walls.
I certainly agree. All right, that has been your Rowdy.com Big Three from Charlotte, North Carolina. For Cutler, I'm Bass. Leave your comments below and join us at Rowdy.com. We'll see you next time.
And we might have some surprises on video later in the week.
We might have some surprises.
That I think you'll find very exciting.
You'll find them surprising.
Rowdy.com. Say it like it is.
Say what like it is?
Rowdy.com.